our attention is drawn and absorbed by what's not working. Imagine you've got a sales team. You got 10 reps and you've got 2 reps that are just killing it and 2 or 3 that are on the verge of being fired. If you really understand why your 2 or 3 best reps are delivering results that they are, it gives you the hope of elevating the entire team. It never works the other way. You're never going to learn things from the worst 2 reps that you can export to make the whole team better forever. So in a way, it's kind of sad that our attention is focused toward the problem because there are more seeds of ongoing improvement in the bright spots.
That's Dan Heath, the co-author of several New York Times best-selling books, including Decisive, Switch, and Made to Stick, working with his brother Chip. Dan's latest book, a solo effort, is called Reset: How to Change What's Not Working. As many of us enter 2025 with an eye toward new personal and professional goals, Reset offers lessons about reconstructing our systems and habits to get the most effective results. In today's episode, Dan shares stories and case studies that illuminate the book's counterintuitive teachings, like why leaders shouldn't look to encourage buy-in from their employees. We explore how to embrace a new mindset around goals and incentives through what Dan refers to as leverage points. Whether you're looking to restructure an entire organization or just stick to your New Year's resolutions, Dan's advice will help you to zoom out and think clearer and quicker and smarter. So let's get to it. I'm Bob Safian, and this is Rapid Response. I'm Bob Safian. I'm here with Dan Heath, best-selling author and host of the podcast, What It's Like to Be. Dan, great to talk with you.
Hey, Bob, it's been a long time.
Dan, you have written some of my favorite business books.
Hey,
Made to
thanks.
Stick, Switch, Decisive, The Power of Moments. Great lessons in them. I commend all of them to our listeners. You've now got a new book coming out this month called Reset: How to Change What's Not Working. And the theme is perfect for this moment, the season of New Year's resolutions for us as individuals, for us as businesses, sort of the equivalent of New Year's resolutions, goals for the year ahead. What prompted you to take on this topic?
It's funny. Weirdly enough, this topic was prompted by a trip to Chick-fil-A during the pandemic era. So I'd been sent out to fetch, nuggets for the family, and I went out, and it was pandemic era when drive-thrus were kind of at their heyday. And so I get there, and I swear to you, there are no fewer than 50 cars in line. And so I am just like sweating. I hate lines. I'm trying to formulate some kind of lie I can tell my wife or why I came back with no nuggets. And then what happens next just completely flips my emotions because this line is just steadily creeping forward. I mean, it is the weirdest thing. It's like almost like those automatic car washes that kind of pull you along, And so I end this experience just totally fascinated because to get through 50 cars, there's no way it took more than 10 minutes. And so I had to figure out every fast food chain in the world is trying to do this same thing, serve a lot of cars in a drive-through. Why is it that Chick-fil-A and certain Chick-fil-A's in particular seem to have kind of mastered this? And so that planted the seed. Originally, this book was intended to answer the question, how do you make things run better? And so that was the seed that was planted at Chick-fil-A is how can Chick-fil-A do something that's so much better than what everybody else is trying to do? We think competitive markets, you immediately see your advantage eroded away and competition takes over. But let's face it, folks. I mean, Arby's does not look like that. This Chick-fil-A that I went to can process 400 cars in an hour. That's a car every 9 seconds. So anyway, that was the original formulation of the mission. And as I went deeper and deeper, I started to realize that my interest was not purely on how do we run things better, like any performance improvement, but it was more on situations where people had kind of settled in to a subpar equilibrium. It's like you kind of felt stuck. It wasn't a crisis, there wasn't an emergency, But maybe you had just gotten in a rhythm that had persisted for months or for years, and nobody really liked it. Nobody thought you were nailing it, but it was like you had sort of given up hope of seeing it improve. And so that's when the book topic really clicked for me, is how can I get people unstuck and help them escape the gravity of how things have always worked?
I mean, one of the things you emphasize in the book is the idea that like every system is perfectly designed to get the result it gets, which is logical and yet counterintuitive at the same time. Like, we do what we do because whether we're conscious about it or not, like, that's the way everything is set up, our plan and our habits.
Exactly right. And that quote, which is from a healthcare expert named Paul Batalden, one of my favorites in the book. Every system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets. And that captures the situation that I'm trying to help people with. In fact, the very first story in the book is about this receiving area at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. And the situation in this receiving area is that for as long as anybody can remember, it's taken them 3 days to get packages from the receiving area to their ultimate destination in the hospital. So, same building. It's not a maze or anything. It's just there is a sufficient amount of backlogs and delays that people have come to accept this. And the consequences are pretty severe, because what happens is sometimes medications just expire in the box. They're supposed to have been refrigerated, but they weren't refrigerated in time. Sometimes the staffers are trying to work around them and like over order to outsmart them because they're worried they won't get them in time. And so this new guy comes in, this guy named Paul Suet, determined to turn this around. And what I love about that moment, where you're saying to yourself, for years, for as long as anyone can remember, we've come to work, we've put in a hard day's work. These people were not dumb, they were not lazy. They were just stuck in a system that had taken root, that had become entrenched, so much so that nobody could even imagine how it could change.
That feeling is familiar for a lot of us, in a work sense, in a personal sense. And you look at this challenge of changing out of that through the lens of leverage points. So what is a leverage point?
Leverage point is very simply a place where a little bit of effort yields disproportionate return. So in that Northwestern Memorial receiving area example, one of the things they figured out very quickly was, hey, we're using a lot of batch processes. Batch process like laundry, where you wait to have, a load full before you start it, or a dishwasher, nobody washes like one spoon at a time. And so they had this idea that was going to make things more efficient. The packages come in and maybe you wait for a pile of packages to build up, and then you do
it all
inventories
at once.
Exactly. That makes perfect sense.
Sounds like it makes sense. Yeah.
And in reality, what had happened was, none of this stuff needed to be batched. A dishwasher is batched because it has a certain capacity, but there weren't those traits in the system. Fast forward 6 weeks later, they cut the delays in half. 6 more weeks later, so 12 weeks in total, 90% of the places in this hospital were getting daily deliveries. And so to me, that's a perfect example of what a leverage point looks like. It's like a place you can push and you get a lot of results, a lot of bang for the buck.
Yeah, you use this analogy in the book about moving the boulder, that like this, you're trying to move something. And it's very persuasive about sort of the power of momentum. You talk about the progress principle. Any movement helps generate the next movement.
That's right. Yeah. So the progress principle is something I cite in the book and come back to a lot. It's from Teresa Amabile and Stephen Kramer. They wrote a book with that title, The Progress Principle. And the idea is that what sustains change, because often you can get a flurry of initial change, like the New Year's resolution effect, right? You really mean it for like 2 weeks and then it slides. But what sustains change is the feeling of progress. And in fact, what Kramer and Amabile found, they studied employee diaries, thousands and thousands of diary entries where people were writing about their experience at work, and that they found that the single biggest motivator of people was not money, it was not recognition, it was not promotions, it was the feeling of progress on meaningful work. And so that's the kind of flywheel we're aiming for, is can we get the boulder rolling just enough to show people that the boulder can be moved, that we are capable of moving it, and then it becomes kind of self-fulfilling.
It sounds like that's one of the things that gets in the way with New Year's resolutions. Like, I'm going to do this every day and feel great. And in the beginning, you feel lousy, right? Like
it's just in the beginning, all you really feel is the work. It's like you don't see the result. There's a story in the book. This woman from Australia, I was actually running a survey to follow people as they set and tried to implement New Year's resolutions. And so this woman was struggling with a lot of health challenges. She was recovering from breast cancer. She had long haul COVID, just in a terrible state physically. And so initially she articulated her resolution as to get healthier. It's kind of classic resolution stuff, exercise more, get healthier. And then the survey basically asked, what's the goal of that goal? Like, why is it that you want to exercise more? And she responded, well, I want to be a better mom, a more active mom. She had 2 young boys. And so she was thinking the chain of logic is, I got to exercise first to get healthy enough to do these things that I aspire to do. But then she was prompted to think, okay, if that's the goal of your goal, are there any other ways that you could do that without going through that intermediate goal, basically? And immediately she just starts popping out all these ideas like, well, music has disappeared from our life, and wouldn't it be great to start playing music? And she comes up with this idea to get the Harry Potter Lego set, one module at a time, and we'll put these together. And she starts playing board games in the evening, because she said the great thing about board games is even if I have to lay on the couch, like I can still participate and have them, spin the spinner for me. And I thought that was such a beautiful example of how a lot of times we lock down too early on a goal, and especially in the corporate world, on a measure of a goal. We start loading incentives and everything behind this goal, and we never ask ourselves, hey, what's the goal of the goal? And might there be a better way to get to that ultimate mission than the one we're choosing?
It sounds like, certainly in this example, but for businesses overall, like we pick the wrong goals. We look in the wrong places. It's not actually the leverage point that we want to get to.
Amen. And one of my favorite stories in the book actually illustrates that. It's about this guy, Ryan Davidson, goes to buy a truck. And it's a long story. I won't tell the whole story. But basically, he buys the truck, and then they start just assaulting him for positive survey responses. I mean, probably a dozen different people, 24 different times over a couple weeks, just hectoring him. Fill out the survey, positive responses are appreciated. What could we have done? How's the truck? Blah, blah, blah. And Ryan Davidson, the guy who bought the truck, is in customer experience himself. So he fills out the survey, gives them, from what he told me, like an A- rating, like generally happy, but annoyed by some things. Never hears from them again. After all the pestering, it goes quiet, except for his salesperson starts texting him, complaining about the fact that the salesperson didn't get all 10 out of 10s. And that his bonus was contingent on that. So that's the perfect example, right? 'Cause if you rewind the tape, at some point, some smart people thought, hey, we genuinely want to make this better for customers. Well, let's measure people's satisfaction on a survey. But then what happens is, over time, you kind of forget about the aspiration, and you just start trying to squeeze out those 10s on the survey, and you start telling customers explicitly what you want them to answer. They literally had a laminated survey in this dealership that they would show customers, here's what you're going to get, and here is the right answer. The right answer is 10 out of 10, 10 out of 10, yes, I was satisfied. And of course, that's just a total charade.
And the whole system is entrenched in a way that no one's stopping and saying, why are we doing this?
Mm-hmm. It reminds me of Goodhart's law. You've probably heard this. When a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. As soon as you start layering on incentives, carrots, and sticks to hit these specific numbers, what used to be a diagnostic, like the origin of the survey is to be a diagnostic. Are we getting better at delivering a customer experience? But as soon as that becomes the end and not a means to the end, like everything gets real squirrely.
Yeah, and you're not moving that boulder, right?
Right.
It's not,
right.
It's not happening. Another method you talk about a way to find a leverage point is study the bright spots. And this is something you and your brother Chip have written about before, about bright spots. And it's always stayed with me as a powerful lesson, because I feel like businesses tend to like, oh, what's that problem? Solve that problem. And what you're saying is kind of maybe look at it the other way.
I swear, I wish I had put a chapter on this topic in every book I've ever written, because I think it may be the most useful and the most important idea that Chip and I ever formulated because of its very simplicity. So the idea, this is not going to blow your mind. Here's the idea. Look at the stuff you're doing that's working really well and study it in hopes that once you understand it better, you can replicate it. That's the whole idea. Study the bright spots. Now, let me tell you why humanity does not do that very simple and powerful idea most of the time, because our attention is drawn and absorbed every time by what's not working, by the problems, by the emergencies. We're sucked in. And it's not that we are not aware that we're succeeding. It's not that we're uninterested in the fact that some people are happy. It's just that we never bother to analyze that with the same tenacity and intensity that we instinctively analyze what's not working. And the contention in the book is, remember, we're hunting for leverage points. We've got this giant boulder in our way. We're hoping to move it. We have to find a place where a little bit goes a long way. A little bit that goes a long way can be directly harvested by us looking at, hey, when are we succeeding today? Can we take it apart? Can we reverse engineer it in hopes that we can do more of that?
I often ask CEOs, particularly at big organizations, I'll say, you get so much data coming to you every day about your business, and there's always good news and there's always bad news. And how do you know what to pay attention to and where sort of the focus is? And so often, it's not about the volume of the data. It's sort of about their choice, about what their philosophy is on how they run the organization.
It is a choice to spend your time, wallowing in the problems. And look, I'm not like anti-problem solving. Of course, if there's an emergency, you got to deal with it. But the point is, we divide our attention maybe 95 to 5%. And there are lessons buried in the bright spots that offer us the hope. Like imagine you've got a sales team, you got 10 reps and you've got 2 reps that are just killing it and 2 or 3 that are on the verge of being fired. Like your attention is naturally drawn to the problem area, of course. But what I'm saying is, if you really understand why your 2 or 3 best reps are delivering the results that they are, it gives you the hope of elevating the entire team. It never works the other way. You're never going to learn things from the worst 2 reps that you can export to make the whole team better forever. So in a way, it's kind of sad that our attention is focused toward the problem, because there are more seeds of ongoing improvement in the bright spots.
The second half of the book focuses not as much on identifying a leverage point, but on how to make it move. And there's something you call restacking resources. It's basically the idea that, even if you have a leverage point that you've identified, you're not going to suddenly have a new flood of money or time or people to be able to make it move, that there's sort of trade-offs involved.
The heart of the book is this 2-part framework that just says, to change a stuck system, you got to find leverage points. That's like a direction or a priority. Where do you push? And then the second part is, where are you going to get the oomph to push in that new direction? And the oomph is resources. And then you immediately hit a wall there because people say, well, I don't have any extra resources. And so that becomes the motivation for the second half of the book is, if you want to push in a new direction, you're going to need fuel. Where do you get the fuel? You don't have any extra fuel, so you got to take it from somewhere in what you're already doing. And that's super painful, because probably none of your colleagues think they're doing something that's totally pointless and can be shut down and recycled as the fuel for your mission. So what I do is I go through a number of different strategies for finding that fuel to kind of push in a new direction. An example of that would be waste. The notion of waste is often employed with an eye toward efficiency. It's like you want to really crank the methodology on reducing waste in a factory to get your efficiency rates up. In the book, though, I'm taking a slightly different tack on it, which is that if you can identify waste, which was defined by, the great Toyota production system godfather Taiichi Ohno as any activity that does not add value in the eyes of the customer, which is a kind of expansive notion of waste. If you can find areas of waste, then you can immediately harvest that and use it to provide some of that fuel to push on your leverage points.
In terms of organizational change, You say in the book that getting buy-in is the wrong way to think about change, which is the opposite of what a lot of people say. Can you explain what you mean by that?
What happens is the leaders go in the smoky room and they kind of hatch an idea for a change. And then they come out of the smoky room and then they have to get quote unquote buy-in, which means I'm going to try to get my people to want what I want rather than what they want. Like that's the basic premise of buy-in. And what I'm suggesting in the book is there's a much simpler way to start change. And that is if you imagine a Venn diagram where, one circle is what's required to succeed at change. It's a bundle of activities and actions and goals. And then the intersecting circle is what's desired today. Like your people, they have ideas for how to improve things. They have ideas that if they were czar for a day, there's 12 different things that they would push. So the question is there any intersection between what is required and what is desired? And I bet you almost every time there will be. That's where you start. And that's not buy-in. That is what I call in the book tapping motivation, which is honoring, what people want today, what they're chomping at the bit to do, and you're kind of unleashing them.
It's like they're following through on their own ideas as opposed to you having to sell them on yours.
Amen. Amen. And look, I don't think that Venn diagram is ever 100% overlap. So the obvious question is, well, okay, maybe you start in the overlap, but there's a whole lot left to do. What then? And I think the what then is mostly accounted for by the progress idea we've talked about a couple of times. Progress is the spark that makes believers of skeptics. If you can kind of channel people's natural energy, what do they want to do that gets you in the right strategic direction? Get yourself in motion, start to budge the boulder. That becomes the visible evidence that this is worth doing, that this isn't as painful or onerous as maybe some people might have concluded. And so you get more and more people jumping on the bandwagon.
I wanted to ask you about your podcast. It's about people who love their work in a range of jobs. I had lunch recently with a colleague who was acknowledging to me that the work I do, I found something that I'm good at and that I make enough money on, but I've never really loved it. And I think there are a lot of people who have that experience, who are successful or successful enough, but their work is not, fulfilling for them in that way.
Yeah.
And your podcast is it's inspiring, but I can imagine for some of those people, it can also be frustrating. Why can't I feel this way?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I completely grant that premise. And I mean, one of the things that the podcast has sparked for me is it is so inspiring to hear these people who love what they do talk about it, that it just makes you regret how many people aren't in that spot. One of my friends, Becky Margiotta, talks about this thing called the genius trap, which is in our lives, what happens is when we're good at something, people are like, "Oh, Bob, you're good at that thing. Here's some more of that."
Right.
And you like to be told you're good. And your employer, your coach or whatever likes that you're good because they can shovel more of the stuff that you're good at towards you and get some more work done for the team or the organization. And so it's sort of like you're on this self-reinforcing path and you're chugging along and you get better with practice. And then, 20 years later, you kind of wake up and you're like, well, I was always good at that, but I never loved it. I never got a sense of purpose or satisfaction from it. And that's thus the name, the genius trap is, often we can be kind of confined inadvertently, unconsciously to the things we excelled at without regard for, is that really the direction we wanted to go?
Well, I listening to you, I am, thinking of my own children, my sons, and sort of how to help them find, or I guess, allow them to have the freedom to look for work that they really find satisfying.
Yeah. One of the things that has dawned on me over the course of the show is I think a lot of our advice to young people can be so one-dimensional. It's sort of like the first layer is I have a niece that in high school, she just adored animals, and she was like volunteering in this horse camp, and so every time an adult would learn that, what's their first response? Oh, you should be a veterinarian. It's just like we do this kind of dumb pattern matching. We don't have to put a cash register on everything everybody loves. You know what I mean? She could be an accountant and be thrilled and still love animals. Like we don't have to. It's not a one issue vote. I think some of the stuff that's giving people value is almost like structural stuff. Like I am a big introvert, and I think if I had kind of realized and internalized that earlier, it would have eliminated about 60% of the world's possible career paths. Like I talked to a guy who's a professional Santa Claus, and his job is to make kids fall in love in seconds, and that is not a job I'm going to excel at. But I think it would be fallacious to think, oh, well, this guy's inevitable career path was to be a professional Santa Claus. No, it's like, it's what's underneath that. Really get to those kind of foundational type layers.
Well, Dan, this has been great. Thanks so much for doing it.
Man, thank you for having me on, Bob. Great to see you.
Talking with Dan, I always find myself nodding in agreement. Everything he shares seems so logical and simple, and yet I also come away with my brain buzzing with new ideas and new approaches. As we head into 2025, I've been reflecting on how I can streamline the work that I'm a part of to re-examine the goals and make sure they're the ones that matter most. As you look at your goals and resolutions for 2025, I hope you can find both meaning and impact in the year ahead. In our next episodes, we'll be digging into the next frontiers of AI, a crisis in the luxury fashion world, and more. I'm Bob Safian. Thanks for listening.